The north wind came down the valley like it owned the place. Because it did, a field of white stretched to the foot of the mountains. Snow falling sideways. Somewhere out in the dark pasture, a gray horse screamed not the ordinary scream of panic, the scream of an animal that had been broken once, and was remembering, in detail, how the breaking was done. The east fence cracked, then gave way. On the porch of a house half a mile off, a lantern swung in the wind. A man stepped out with a rifle in his hand, eyes set on the corral. He did not run. Mountain men do not run before they have finished reading the wind. Farther on in town, a blue door eased open. A woman stepped into the storm in the wrong coat, the wrong boots, wrong everything, except for one thing. She knew which horse needed her. The snow filled in her footprints before she reached the end of the road. Somewhere out there, between the broken fence and the woman in the wrong coat, 3 weeks of patience were about to be tested by a single night, and not all of it was weather. The kind of cold that doesn't ask permission. It comes down from the north in December like it owns the place. Because it does. Moves through walls the way water moves through old wood. Not around, not over. Through. Sits in your chest like something swallowed wrong. And won't shift no matter how many times you clear your throat, or pull your coat tighter, or stand closer to the fire. Harrow Falls, Wyoming Territory. December 1887. 2,000 people, give or take. One church with a bell that rang on time every Sunday, because the pastor believed that the only thing standing between civilization and the wilderness was consistency. 3 saloons that believed the same thing, but expressed it differently, and with more warmth. A school that needed a new roof, and had needed one for 4 years. Every spring the town council said something would be done. Every summer nothing was. Every winter the teacher put a bucket under the leak in the northeast corner and moved her desk 3 feet to the left and said nothing about it to anyone. Streets wide enough for wagons. Not wide enough for 2 wagons and a disagreement, which meant someone was always backing up, always giving way, always pretending they'd chosen to. The town sat at the edge of 2 worlds and belonged fully to neither. Behind it, to the north and west, the mountains. Not distant mountains, not scenic mountains you visited on a summer holiday. The working kind. The kind that had opinions about you, that tested your judgment, that rewarded competence and punished carelessness, without mercy and without apology. The kind that shaped the men who lived in them, into something that didn't quite translate back to town life. Ahead of it, to the south and east, the territory opened into rangeland and creek valleys, and the distant suggestion of Cheyenne, where money came from and decisions got made, and men like Harlan Druce had offices with carpets and fireplaces, and the particular confidence of people who had never needed to watch the sky for weather because they had buildings that kept it out. Harrow Falls sat in between. It served both. It understood neither. It got along. The town ran on a simple economy. Work, weather, gossip, not necessarily in that order, and frequently all 3 at once. The gossip was arguably the most sophisticated of the 3. It had rules, unspoken ones, but rules nonetheless, as real and enforceable as any that appeared in the town charter. You didn't say a thing directly if you could say it sideways. You didn't name someone if you could describe them well enough that everyone knew who you meant. You spoke softly and sweetly, and with the specific, warm concern of someone who cared very deeply, genuinely about the state of other people's lives. Which is to say, you spoke with appetite dressed up as compassion. And you dressed it up well enough that sometimes even you believed in the costume. Harrow Falls was very good at appetite dressed as compassion. It had been practicing for a long time. The women were better at it than the men, generally speaking. Not because women were more given to appetite, they weren't, in Harrow Falls or anywhere else, but because the town gave them fewer other outlets. Men had their work and their decisions, and their movement across the landscape. Women had the church steps and the general store and the particular social architecture of a small town where everyone's business was everyone's business, and where the currency of connection was information, and where information about someone's failure or misfortune or unfortunate situation passed through that economy with a speed and efficiency that no cattle trade could match. It wasn't cruelty. That was the thing to understand about it. It wasn't cruelty. Not usually, not in the hot and intentional way. It was something quieter and in some ways worse. It was the small violence of people who have never examined their assumptions about what a life should look like, who have sorted the world into the correct kind and the other kind, and who discuss the other kind with gentle, genuine sorrow. Poor thing, they said. And they meant it. That was the part that stung. Poor thing. Sunday morning came the way it always did in December, gray first, then pale, then a thin, reluctant light that didn't warm anything, but at least proved the sun hadn't given up entirely. The church bell rang at 8. By 8:45, the congregation filed out the front doors in the order that small towns always produce, without anyone organizing it. The mayor's family first, then the families with money, then the families who used to have money, then everyone else. Margaret Hale came last, not because she was slow, not because she lingered. She exchanged a few words with the pastors, yes, but that was courtesy, not delay. She came last because she had learned, over 16 years of Sundays in this town, that there was no one waiting for her at the bottom of the steps, no arm to take, no hand reaching back. Coming last meant she didn't have to watch other people find each other and feel, in that particular hollow way, the shape of her own absence. She was 38 years old. She had been teaching at the Harrow Falls schoolhouse since she was 22. 16 years of chalk dust and children's questions, and the specific satisfaction of watching someone understand something they didn't understand before. 16 years of walking the same 3 blocks home. 16 years of Sunday mornings descending these steps last, alone. Not dramatically alone. Not weeping into a handkerchief alone. Just alone, the way a fact is alone, without apology or explanation. She stepped onto the bottom stair and adjusted her scarf. Her gloves were mended at the left thumb, the stitching small and tight. The work of someone who did things properly even when no one would notice. Her coat was good wool, dark gray, brushed clean. She was not beautiful in the way the town valued beauty. She had never been young and soft and easy in the way that got you noticed quickly. Never had that particular warmth that made men want to stand close. She was something else. Something that took longer to see. Most people in Harrow Falls had not taken that long. She was 3 steps from the dirt road when she heard it, not directed at her. Not quite. 2 women near the post, voices low and sweet, the way voices get when they're not being unkind on purpose, when they're just being honest, which they consider a kindness of its own. Still teaching, I suppose, 16 years now. Never married, not even once. A pause. Poor thing. Mag kept walking. She had long ago memorized the arithmetic of this town's compassion. Poor thing, said softly, said like a gift. Like they were offering her something by noticing, like their pity was a courtesy she should be grateful for. Like the problem when they were measuring her worth by the prisoner's sentence of a husband, but that they were at least measuring it at all. She was not grateful. She was also not broken, which seemed, consistently, to confuse people. They expected the tears or the bitterness or the brave face that gives away the tears or the bitterness underneath it. When she offered none of the above, when she just walked, straight-backed at her own pace toward her own house, they filed her under sad and moved on. You couldn't blame them. Sad was tidier. She turned the corner onto Miller Street, walked past the barber, the closed milliner, the window of the dry goods store where she caught her own reflection. Dark coat, straight back, face arranged into something neutral and unreadable. She was good at neutral. She had practiced it for years. Inside her chest, where no one could see, things were different. Not tragic, not dramatic, Just present, an awareness she had long since stopped fighting of what she had and what she didn't, held in proportion, examined honestly, without either inflation or self-pity. She had a job she was good at, children who needed her, a house that was hers, enough money for what mattered, knowledge about horses, about people, about the particular grammar of fear and how to speak to it, that most people in Harrow Falls didn't know she had. She had had, exactly once, the beginning of something more at 24. A man who had been interested in her for 2 months, and then one evening had told her she was too much, too certain, too self-possessed. Like those were problems. Like the appropriate response to a woman who knew her own mind was to leave, and leave he had, and she had sat with that for a long time before arriving at a conclusion she'd held ever since. She did not want the approximate version. She did not want the man who would stay only if she made herself smaller. If that meant alone, then alone was what she would be, and she would be it without apology, and without the performance of grief that the town expected. So she had been alone. For 14 years, she had not been happy about it. She was not going to lie to herself. She had not been happy about it, in the specific quiet way that a person is not happy about a thing they have accepted, because the alternative would cost them something they're not willing to pay. But she had been herself, fully, without compromise, and she had at 38 come to believe that was worth more than most people understood it to be. She walked home. Colt Hadley rode into Harrow Falls the same Sunday morning, not at the same time as the churchgoers, not timed to any meeting or arrival. He came from the North Road, which is the road that comes down from the mountains, and he came the way men who live in mountains tend to come into towns. Like the town is the strange thing. Like the buildings are the intrusion. Like someone has taken a perfectly good piece of landscape and cluttered it up with intentions. He was 31 years old. He did not look 31 in the way. The men of Harrow Falls looked 31. They looked their age in clean collars and recent haircuts, and the particular softness of men who slept in the same bed every night and ate their meals on a schedule. Colt looked older in the face, the kind of older that comes from weather and attention rather than time, and younger somehow in the way he moved, loose, unhurried, the way of a man who had never needed to hurry because the mountain didn't care if you were late. He wore a coat that had started life as something respectable. Good wool, good cut, and had since been repaired with leather patches at both elbows and along the right shoulder where a branch had caught it. 2 winters back, his boots were good, his hat was not. His horse was a sturdy bay named Rook who had opinions about towns and expressed them through his ears. First flat back when they hit the main street, then forward as he assessed the smells. Then one tilted skeptically sideways in a posture that said, "I will tolerate this, but I won't pretend to enjoy it." Colt tied Rook at the post outside the land office, looked at the town. The town looked back. Some people openly, some from the corners of their eyes. A mountain man riding in on a Sunday in December was not ordinary. It was the kind of thing that went into the gossip economy before he'd finished dismounting. He had been to Harrow Falls twice before. Once at age 12, when his Uncle Reed brought him for supplies and let him pick out a pocket knife he still carried. Once at 19, passing through on his way somewhere else that he couldn't now remember. He did not have a particular feeling about the town either time. It was a town. Towns existed. He lived elsewhere. But his Uncle Reed was dead now, 3 weeks dead, in the ground on the property that had been his for 30 years, and was now, by the specific and unbending language of a dead man's will, Colt's. 412 acres. Good grass when the season allowed. Good water, a creek that ran clear even in the dry years, which was a rare thing in this corner of Wyoming and worth considerably more than most people realized. A house that needed work, a barn that needed more, and a debt. The debt it had been carrying since a bad winter 6 years back, when Reed had borrowed against the land to keep the cattle alive, and had not, in the end, lived long enough to finish paying it back. The note had changed hands twice since then. It currently belonged to a man named Harlan Drooks, an investor out of Cheyenne, who had arrived in Harrow Falls 3 days ago and was waiting, with the patience of someone who charged interest on patience, to speak with the new owner. Colt stood outside the land office and did not go in immediately. He was not afraid. He simply had the mountain man's habit of pausing before entering enclosed spaces, assessing the threshold, getting his bearings before committing. In the woods, this habit had saved his life twice and prevented embarrassment a dozen more times. In town, it just made him look slow. He was not slow. He went inside. The lawyer's name was Emmett Price, small man, careful hands. The kind of organized that takes sustained effort to maintain and quietly lets you know it. Every paper on his desk placed with intention. Every pen parallel to its neighbor. The world around him controlled, in the way of someone who has decided that if he cannot control the large things, he will at least govern the small ones absolutely. Colt sat across from him and felt immediately that he was in exactly the wrong kind of space. Too contained, too many right angles. Price laid out the situation with professional efficiency. The land, 412 acres, legally transferred. The debt, $4,200, owed originally to a lending institution in Cheyenne, currently held as a note by an investor named Harlan Drooks. The terms, due in full at the end of March, 4 months from now. The problem, $4,000 was not a sum Colt had, possessed, or could currently imagine possessing. He had a good rifle, a good horse, a saddle that needed new stitching on the left fender, and approximately $90 in his coat pocket. He listened without interrupting. He had always had this habit. Men who talked a lot sometimes mistook it for slowness, for the labored processing of a man not quick enough to keep up. It was not that. It was the discipline of someone who had learned young that the woods will tell you everything you need to know if you stop filling the silence with your own voice. The rabbit that freezes at the edge of the clearing, the wind that shifts before the weather does, the snow that settles in a particular way when the weight on it is animal rather than wind. Everything speaking. You just had to be quiet enough to hear it, Drooks, Colt said. When Price finished, he's in town. Arrived 3 days ago. He's staying at the Cattleman's Hotel, and he wants to meet with you. What kind of man? Price considered this with the seriousness it deserved. The kind who arrives from Cheyenne and does not take his coat off indoors. Make of that what you will. Colt made of it exactly what Price intended. Harlan Drooks was 54 years old and had the look of a man who had decided, sometime in his late 30s, that warmth was inefficient, not cruel, not loud, not dramatic in the way of men who want you to know they have power. Just efficient, like a machine that has been running for a long time and has, through attrition, worn off all the parts that aren't strictly necessary to function. What remained was precise and purposeful and completely indifferent to what you thought of it. He was in the small sitting room off the Cattleman's Hotel lobby, and he received Colt in it as though it were his own parlor, and Colt were a scheduled appointment, which Colt supposed he was, Mr. Hadley. Drooks gestured to the chair across from him. Sit, Colt sat. He noted the word. Not. Please sit. Not. Would you care to sit? Just sit. He filed that. I'll be direct, Drooks said. Appreciated. The debt on your uncle's land is mine. $4,200. Due in March. You don't have it. No, I'm prepared to restructure the terms. Lower interest. Extended repayment. In exchange for an equity partnership. 15% stake in the operation as it develops. Drooks's eyes were gray and measured. The eyes of a man who had learned to calculate before he spoke, and only spoke what the calculation confirmed. But I don't invest in operations I don't believe in. And at this moment, Mr. Hadley, I don't know enough about you to believe in you. Colt waited. There was more. There's a horse, Drooks said. Not what Colt expected. He kept that off his face. In your uncle's barn? Gray animal. Your uncle acquired him about 8 months ago. In that time, no one has been able to ride him. No one has come close enough to bridle him without incident. 3 men have tried. 2 of them are still favoring their ribs. I know the horse, then you know he's a problem? Or the men were. Druce looked at him. A pause. A recalibration. Small, but there. Something in the gray eyes shifting fractionally, like a lens adjusting. I want to see you manage your stock, Druce said. If you can't bring that animal to order, publicly, before witnesses, so there's no question of what happened, I have no confidence in your ability to run this operation. The debt stays due in March, full amount, and if I can, then we discuss terms. Colt looked at him. Not a stupid man, not a generous one either, necessarily. But a man who meant what he said and would be held to what he meant, which was more than you could count on from everyone. 3 weeks, Druce said. I'll be in Harrow Falls through Christmas. I want to see progress. Colt stood. I'll look at the horse. You'll need to do more than look, I know. He left. Outside, December hit him in the face like a reminder. He untied Rook and looked down the main street of this town that was now, whether he'd asked for it or not, his. Somewhere in it, there was a horse that 3 men hadn't been able to touch well. He had spent his whole life learning to approach things that didn't want to be approached. How different could it be? He saw the horse for the first time that afternoon, stood at the fence of the rear corral and looked at the animal. And the animal looked back, and they spent a long moment simply assessing. The way 2 things that might become relevant to each other do when they first occupy the same space. Ghost was gray. Not pale gray, not silver, not the washed-out color of old wood. The gray of storm clouds when they mean it, deep and shifting and darker at the center, with something almost silver at the edges where the winter light caught the individual hairs of his coat. 15 hands at least. Probably more. Built like something meant to move across difficult terrain, the kind of ground that defeated horses designed for comfort, deep chest, strong hind quarters, legs that had a particular quality of competence about them, as though they had already solved the problems the terrain ahead of them would pose. He stood at the far end of the corral. He was not pacing, not frantic. Not doing the explosive thing Colt had been told to expect from a horse that had already sent 3 men to recover. He was watching. That was the thing that struck Colt first. Not the size, not the obvious contained power, but the watching. The horse was watching him with something that was not fear and not aggression, and not the dull vacancy of an animal that had given up. It was something more deliberate than any of those things. Assessing, Colt could respect that. He leaned on the fence rail without entering, without approaching the gate, just being there, a shape at the edge of the horse's world, without making demands of it. His hands loose on the rail, his breathing even. His posture angled slightly away, because facing a frightened animal directly is an act of aggression whether you intend it that way or not. And Colt had learned the difference between intending something and doing it a long time ago. Ghost's ears were forward. His nostrils worked steadily, pulling in information about this new shape at the edge of his world, cataloging it, filing it somewhere in the complex archive that prey animals keep of everything that has ever frightened them or left them alone. They stood like that for 20 minutes. Ghost did not come closer. But he didn't leave either. That felt like something. Colt couldn't have said exactly what. He went to look at the property, but he thought about it all the while. The house was livable. Barely. Reed Hadley had been a man who spent his time outdoors and treated indoors as a place to sleep when the outdoors became genuinely impossible, which in Wyoming was a significant portion of the year, but not all of it. The furniture was sparse, functional. The kitchen had what a kitchen needed, and nothing it didn't. The bedroom was a bedroom. There was a stone fireplace in the main room that worked, which was the most important thing. Colt built a fire, sat in the single chair that faced it, looked at the flames for a long time. He was not a man who examined his feelings with any regularity. Living alone in the mountains for years at a stretch selects against that habit, or at least against the talking about it part of it. The mountains are not interested in your feelings. They are interested in whether your fire is big enough, whether your shelter is sound, whether your food will last until the thaw. They ask practical questions and reward practical answers and have nothing to say about the interior life, except keep moving. But he was honest enough, in the privacy of his own head, sitting in front of his dead uncle's fire in his dead uncle's chair in his dead uncle's house, to admit that this was strange. All of it strange to be in a house, strange to be in a town, strange to be in possession of something. 400 acres, a debt, a responsibility, when he had spent his entire adult life traveling light, owing nothing, answering only to the mountain and the weather and his own judgment. He had never owned anything before, not land, not structure, not debt, not the particular kind of obligation that tied you to a place and said, "You must be here, you must show up, you cannot simply leave when the conditions change." He had owned his horse, his rifle, his gear. He had owned the knowledge in his head, the particular and accumulated knowledge of years in the mountains. How to read weather, how to read terrain, how to move through the wilderness without disturbing it, how to approach the things in it that could hurt you with the specific patience that turned encounters from confrontations into something more like mutual understanding. He had owned himself, cleanly and completely, with no strings and no obligations and no one waiting for him anywhere. That had always felt like freedom. Sitting here in the dead man's chair in front of the dead man's fire, Colt was not entirely sure it had been. Freedom, he was beginning to think, might be one of those words that means something different from the outside than it does from the inside. From the outside, it looked like no obligations. From the inside, it felt like that for a long time. And then one day it started to feel like something else. Like nothing that requires you. Nothing that would notice the gap if you weren't there. He thought about the horse, the way Ghost watched. The way it wasn't rage in those eyes. Not the hot, senseless rage of an animal that has lost itself to fear. But something more controlled. Something that had learned, through repetition and pain, to look like rage because rage was safer than what was underneath it. Rage said, "I will destroy you before you can destroy me." What was underneath rage said something harder to say. Something that required a kind of vulnerability that Ghost had apparently decided he could no longer afford. Something like, "I have been destroyed before and I survived it, but I don't know if I can again." Colt understood that he would not have said so out loud, not to anyone, not ever. Not in the mountains where the only audience was the trees and the sky and the occasional uninterested elk. Certainly not here, in a town full of people who would not have understood what he meant and would have filed it under. Strange man from the mountains, doesn't know how to talk properly. But he understood it. He went to sleep in the dead man's bed and did not dream, which was his usual condition, and woke at 5 in the morning when the cold demanded it. Monday, first attempt, Colt entered the corral slowly. No rope, no equipment. Just himself and open hands and the careful, non-threatening posture he'd used his whole life, approaching animals in the wild that could hurt him if they chose to. Head slight down, body angled to the side. Movements deliberate and signaled in advance. The posture that says, "I am not a threat, I am just here. You can keep watching." Ghost chose to be a threat instead, not immediately. He watched Colt enter, watched him stop, watched him stand in the center of the corral doing nothing aggressive. And then, as if he'd made a calculation and arrived at a conclusion, he moved fast. He crossed the corral in 3 strides and went up, both front hooves off the ground. The full display, the warning that is also a weapon. And Colt moved sideways, fast enough, the hooves coming down precisely where he'd been standing. Colt backed to the fence. Heart going at a pace he kept off his face. Ghost stood in the center of the corral, looked at him, ears back, nostrils red with the effort and the adrenaline. Everything in his posture saying, "This is not a conversation. This is a boundary. Stay outside it, Art," Colt said quietly. To no one in particular, to the horse, to himself, to the cold air. "All right. I hear you." He left the corral. 3 men from neighboring properties had stopped by to watch because word in Harrow Falls moved before the thing it was about. They said nothing particularly useful. One of them clapped him on the shoulder in the way men do when they want to seem encouraging without actually committing to encouragement. Silas Vane was among them. Silas Vane was 47 years old and owned the largest property bordering Colt's land to the east. He had a wide, weathered face and a handshake like he'd read somewhere that handshakes were important and had been practicing ever since to get it exactly right. He was friendly. Unfailingly, immediately, specifically friendly in the way that Colt, who had spent years in the woods reading the difference between a sound that meant safe and a sound that meant run, cataloged without yet knowing quite what to do with. "Tough animal," Silas said, watching Ghost settle at the far end of the corral. "Your uncle bought him off a trader. I warned Reed at the time, some horses aren't worth the trouble." "Most horses that act like trouble have a reason," Colt said. "Sure, some just have bad blood." Colt looked at Ghost. Ghost was at the far fence watching. Always watching. "I don't believe in bad blood," Colt said. Silas smiled. The kind of smile that moves everything below the cheekbones and nothing above them. "Well, you're young. You'll learn," he said it kindly. That was the thing, he said everything kindly. Colt nodded once and went back to work, but he thought about it later. How specifically Silas had showed up, and how quickly. How he'd mentioned, in that offhand way, that some horses couldn't be fixed. Like he wanted Colt to start believing that before he'd barely started trying. Tuesday. Second attempt, Colt went in earlier. 5:30, barely light, his breath making small clouds in the frozen air. Ghost watched him enter, and this time did not charge. Just stood at the far end and watched while Colt moved to the center and stopped. Colt had spent years waiting out deer in mountain meadows, waiting out elk on ridge lines, where the wind shifted and you had to freeze for an hour, while the animal decided whether you were a threat. He could stand still for a long time. He could make himself small in a way that his size made look improbable, but that he had perfected through practice. He stood, Ghost stood, 20 minutes. 40 an hour, Ghost did not come closer, but his ears moved, forward, back, forward, again processing. His nostrils worked steadily. He was taking in information, filing things, updating the catalog. After 90 minutes, Ghost turned his flank and stood sideways, which is a horse's way of saying, "I have decided you are not worth my full attention." This sounds like rejection. It is not. It means, you are not currently a threat. It means, I am willing to exist in the same space as you, provisionally, on terms I have set and will continue to set. Colt went back inside progress. Invisible, uncountable progress that no one watching would have recognized as progress. He didn't care what it looked like. He cared what it was. Wednesday, 5 in the morning, Ghost was already awake when Colt arrived. Already at the fence of the stall in the barn. Already doing that thing where his attention moved constantly, tracking everything, cataloging everything with the vigilance of something that had learned at cost, that things could change without warning. Colt watched him for a while, and then he heard something. Soft. Low. Pitched below conversation, below command. A voice doing something else entirely, not addressing anyone specifically, or maybe addressing everything in general, the way you do when you're alone in the dark and you need to hear that the world is still manageable. A rhythm more than a language, like a song that had given up its words and kept only the shape of them. He looked toward the corral fence, a woman standing outside, not attempting to enter, not approaching the gate, just there, both hands resting on the top rail, loose, no grip, no urgency. Her coat was dark gray. Her hair was pinned up, a few pieces having escaped the pins and moved in the pre-dawn wind. She was looking at Ghost. Ghost was looking back, and Ghost, this horse that had sent 3 men to nurse their ribs, that had gone up at the sight of Colt 2 days running, was standing still. His head was not high and defensive. His ears were forward, yes, but not tight, not alarmed. His breathing, which Colt had been learning to read, was slower than he had yet seen it. His weight was distributed evenly across all 4 feet, which is the posture of an animal that has decided, at least for the moment, that it is not about to need to run. The woman kept talking, soft, even, a rhythm more than a content. Like a song stripped of its music, left with only the intention behind the notes. Ghost's head lowered an inch, 2 inches. The kind of incremental surrender that happens when something that has been braced for impact realizes the impact is not coming. Colt stood completely still and watched. He had no word for what happened in his chest in that moment. It wasn't simple. It wasn't just surprise, or recognition, or the particular quality of emotion that comes from watching something do effortlessly what you have been struggling to approximate. It was all of those things, and something underneath them that he couldn't identify yet. Then a board under his boot creaked. Ghost's head came up, ears back. The moment shattered the way ice shatters. Not gradually, but all at once, the whole thing gone in an instant. The woman stepped back from the fence, didn't look toward Colt, simply turned and walked away, her figure moving through the pre-dawn dark with the particular steadiness of someone who does not expect to be called back and has not arranged her life around the possibility. Colt stood where he was. Ghost circled the corral once, twice, then stopped, quieter than before. Whatever the woman had done, whatever she'd been, it had left something in the air that even her departure hadn't entirely erased. Colt stayed until full light. He thought about the voice X, the way it had worked on the horse, not through force or authority, but through something quieter. Through presence, maybe. Through the particular quality of being completely there, without agenda, without expectation, without the tension that comes from wanting something from the animal in front of you. He needed to understand what that was. More than that, he needed to know who she was. He asked at the dry goods store, because the dry goods store in a small town is where information lives. The woman behind the counter had 3 facts for him before he'd finished the question. Dark gray coat, hair pinned up, walks past the corrals every morning. That's her, Margaret Hale. She teaches at the school, has done for years. Lives in the small house on Birch Street, the one with the blue door. A brief pause. Waited, 38 years old. Not married the way she said it. Not married, like a weather report. Like a condition of the terrain. Like a thing that required noting in the same breath as her name, because without it the information would be incomplete. Colt bought what he'd come for. On the way out he stopped. She ever work with horses? The woman looked mildly surprised. Her father was a horse trainer. Best in the county, they said before he passed. Why? Just asking, Colt said. He went back to the property and spent the afternoon looking at what needed fixing. There was a lot. The barn needed 2 new boards on the east wall. The corral fence had a section that had been repaired with wire, instead of wood, and the wire had rusted through. The house needed caulking around the windows, or the winter would come inside to live with him. He was assessing the fence when Druce appeared, not by arrangement. The man had a talent for arriving in places as though he'd always intended to be there. How is the horse? Druce asked, working on it. The men I spoke to suggest it cannot be done. The men you spoke to haven't done it, Colt said. That's not the same as can't. Druce looked at the corral. At Ghost, visible through the rails, standing at his usual far end, watching them both with the precise attention of an animal that considers vigilance a survival strategy, because it has learned that it is one. I need more than effort, Mr. Hadley. I need results. Demonstrated. Demonstrated. Public. A precise pause. I also want to address something else. You're a single man, living alone, on land with no established operation, no community standing, no roots. I invest in stable operations. Stability involves more than livestock. Colt looked at him. What exactly are you saying? Drew said it. Simply. Clearly. Like a business proposition, because to him it was. There is a woman in this town who has lived here for 16 years. She is educated, respected in her capacity, unmarried, a marriage, a proper one, settled and real, would demonstrate a kind of investment in this community that an outside investor looks for. It would tell me you intend to stay, that you are building something, not just inheriting something. Colt was very still. Marry her? That's what I'm recommending. Margaret Hale, I have made inquiries. She is regarded as... I heard you, Colt said. He said it quiet. Drew stopped. I need time to think, Colt said. You have until Friday. I'll want your answer. Colt walked away. Not fast. He didn't let it be fast, but steadily. Out of the corral yard and onto the side road, and far enough that the conversation became a thing behind him, rather than a thing happening to him. He thought about a woman at defense pre-dawn dark. He thought about the word Droosh had used. Marry, like it was a business term. Like a woman was a provision in a contract, a clause to be executed, a signature to be obtained. Like the fact that she was a person, with her own history and her own knowledge, and her own particular way of standing, that could calm something broken. Like none of that entered into Droosh's calculation at all. Colt had no opinion on marriage in the abstract. He'd never considered it as something that applied to him. But he had very clear opinions on people being used as instruments. He had come from a childhood where he'd watched it done. He knew exactly what it looked like. He turned back toward the property. He needed to talk to the woman with the blue door. He didn't go that day. He went the next morning. He told himself it was because morning was a more decent hour to knock on someone's door than the evening, which true. But the whole truth involved standing in his kitchen the previous night, trying to rehearse what he would say, and realizing he had nothing. He had lived alone, in the mountains for most of his adult life. He could start a fire with wet wood. He could read a map by starlight. He could walk 40 miles in a day without stopping more than twice. He did not know how to begin a conversation with a woman he had never spoken to, in a town that didn't feel like his yet, about a horse that was both his entire problem and the most genuinely interesting thing that had happened to him in recent memory. He went at 5:45. Before the town woke, the house on Birch Street had a blue door, exactly as described. The paint was old but carefully maintained, the color of a sky at the moment just before it commits to being blue, when it's still in conversation with gray about what it wants to be. The step was swept clean. The window beside it had curtains that were plain and practical and hung evenly. He knocked, a reasonable pause. It was not yet 6. Then the door opened. Margaret Hale looked at him without surprise, which was not what he expected. He was a large man, who had just knocked on her door before dawn. Most people reacted to that. She was a woman who, by the town's accounting, had reason to be cautious of men who showed up unexpectedly. She was not most people. She had the kind of face that took a moment to read, not because it was unreadable, but because it was doing several things at once, and you had to decide which one to look at first. Her eyes were gray and level, and had the quality of eyes that had spent a long time watching things and had learned to do it without announcing they were watching. Her posture was straight without being rigid. Her expression was composed without being closed. She was not beautiful in the way the town measured beauty, or in the way that got you noticed quickly. She was something else. Something that required attention to see, and rewarded it when you gave it. You were at the corral, she said. 2 nights ago. Not a question. Yes, he said, you're Colt Hadley. You own the Hadley land now. Yet she waited. She was good at waiting. He could tell this immediately. The particular quality of someone for whom silence is not uncomfortable, for whom the pause between statement and response is not a void to be filled but a space to be used. "I saw you with the horse," he said. "Ghost." "The gray one, I know which one. I've been trying for 3 days." He stopped, tried again. "He doesn't do that for me. What did he do for me?" Stood still, dropped his head. Mag leaned one shoulder against the doorframe, crossed her arms, not defensively, just settling in, making herself comfortable in a doorway conversation she had apparently decided she was willing to have. "What do you want?" she said. Not unkind, just direct. He liked direct. "I want to know what you were doing." "I was standing, I know. But how?" A pause. Something moved across her face, brief, barely perceptible. He might have missed it if he hadn't been watching for the small things. If his whole life hadn't been training him to watch for small things. "Your investor?" she said. "Druce?" "He said something about me. It landed between them." "Yes," Colt said. "I heard it." She met his eyes and held them. "Not from you. From the women at the general store. By noon yesterday it was the whole town." He felt that. More than he expected to. "I should have spoken to you first," he said. "I didn't. That was wrong." She looked at him. He looked back. He had spent years in the woods learning not to look away from things that were looking at you. "Why are you here?" she said. "Actually, the horse," he said. "I need to understand what you know, and—" He took a breath, held it, released it into the December air. "And I owe you an apology that I don't know how to give properly. But I'm giving it anyway." She was quiet for a moment. The town was still sleeping. Somewhere nearby a bird, insane, December surviving bird, made a brief sound and went quiet. "I helped the horse," Mag said finally. "Not you. And not any arrangement that man is proposing, I understand, do you?" "Yes." She studied him. The gray eyes doing their work, reading something, filing something. "Before sunrise," she said. "No witnesses. No one knows." She paused. "And I am not a solution, Mr. Hadley. I am a person. If you need reminding of that again, we stop. I won't need reminding." Another pause. "The horse's name is Ghost," she said. "I know, he chose it himself. The way he moves. The color." She looked out past Colt, toward somewhere he couldn't see. "Ghost is a good name for something that people have decided doesn't exist." Colt looked at her. And for the first time since he'd ridden into Harrow Falls, he felt something that wasn't wariness or strategy or the low, constant hum of a problem without a visible solution. He felt like he might be standing in exactly the right place. He didn't say that. He nodded once and said he'd be at the corral at 5. She said she'd be there. Friday came. Druce kept his word. He did not call a meeting or send letters. He did what efficient men do when they want an outcome without fingerprints. He told the right people in the right rooms and let the town's economy do the rest. By Friday afternoon, Harrow Falls knew Druce's condition, the horse, the deadline. And the other part, that Colt Hadley, the mountain man who'd ridden in from nowhere, was being asked to court Margaret Hale if he couldn't manage the gray horse. The town received this the way it received most interesting information. With appetite, Meg heard it the way she heard most things about herself in this town. Sideways. She was at the general store. Third in line, waiting her turn, her mind on the list in her coat pocket, and the lesson she needed to plan for Monday. The two women ahead of her were not whispering. They thought they were, can you imagine? At her age, being offered to him like well, Druce didn't say offered, exactly. What else would you call it? A sound that might have been a laugh. Poor thing. There it was again. Poor thing. Mag set her items on the counter. Precise, deliberate. Each one placed without noise, without hurry. She paid exactly what was owed. She said thank you to the man behind the counter. She walked out. The cold hit her face. She kept walking. She walked the 3 blocks home. The blue door. Inside, she took off her coat, hung it on its hook, put the groceries away. Every item in its place. Then she sat down in the chair by the window, her hands on her knees. The street outside was ordinary. Gray afternoon. A wagon going past. Two children running somewhere with the urgent purposefulness of children who have invented a reason to run. She sat there until the cold in her hands went away. Then she stood up, got her coat, and walked toward the corral, not because of Druce, not because of Colt Hadley, and his problem and his debt and his investor, who had decided she was a useful variable in an equation because Ghost was there, and Ghost needed someone who understood him. And that was enough of a reason. She didn't know Colt was there until she was at the fence. He was on the far side of the corral, sitting on an overturned water barrel, not watching Ghost, looking at the ground. His coat was pulled tight, his hat low. He looked like a man carrying weight he hadn't put down all day, and wasn't sure how. He looked up when he heard her footsteps on the frozen ground. Neither of them spoke. Ghost, at the center of the corral, did something then. He turned his head toward Mag. His ears came forward. One step, just one. The tentative movement to something to see if safety is still where it was. Colt watched this happen and said nothing. Mag stepped up to the fence, loose hands on the rail. She began to speak in the low, even rhythm she had learned at her father's knee. Not words, exactly, or not only words. A cadence, a presence. A declaration of occupying space without demand. Ghost took another step. Colt sat very still on his barrel. He was good at still. She had noticed this immediately. Most men moved when they were uncomfortable. They fidgeted, adjusted, found some way to externalize the discomfort. Colt went quiet when he was uncomfortable in a way that made him more focused, not less. She talked to Ghost for maybe 15 minutes. The horse came to within 10 feet of the fence. 10 feet for Ghost was not nothing. 10 feet was significant. When she stopped, the horse stood for a moment, then moved away slowly. Not fleeing, just going. The way animals leave when the thing that called them has finished saying what it meant to say. Mag dropped her hands from the fence. He was broken down deliberately, she said. Colt's head came up. The way he reacts to sudden movement, she said. To rope. To anything that constrains. That's not a horse that was never handled. That's a horse that was handled wrong. Systematically. Someone taught him that people approaching with intent meant pain. She paused. Who had him before your uncle? Colt thought of Silas Vane. The friendly handshake. The comment about bad blood. The speed of his arrival. The specificity of his advice. I'm going to find out, he said. She looked at him directly. When you do, don't do anything with it that I wouldn't do. What does that mean? It means don't throw a fist at it. Don't make it about your anger. She held his gaze. I know the type. Mountain men especially. Everything is a thing to be confronted. And you're saying don't confront it. I'm saying confront it correctly. She stepped back from the fence. Ghost didn't get better because someone confronted him. He got better because someone was patient enough to let him decide. Colt sat with that. Same time tomorrow, Mag said. She walked away. He watched her go and thought. He had been in Harrow Falls for 5 days. And for the first time in those 5 days, what he felt was not dread, and not obligation, and not the weight of everything he stood to lose. It was something else, something he couldn't put a name to yet. He built the fire that night, and sat with the ghost of his uncle's chair, and thought about what it meant to approach something that had learned that people meant pain. He thought about Ghost. He thought about the woman with gray eyes. He did not think about the debt. That felt significant. The mornings had a shape now, 5 o'clock. Dark that was the particular dark of a December morning in Wyoming, where the sky is not just absent of light but actively black. The stars burning so hard and cold, they seem more like warnings than comfort. Cold that had opinions about your character. Colt at the corral fence. Mag, 2 minutes behind him. Never late, never early. 2 minutes. Like she was giving him exactly enough time to be there first. So it didn't look like she'd been waiting for him. He noticed. He didn't say anything about it, because some things you notice and file and let be what they are. Ghost had made his own decision about the mornings. He He didn't announce it. He simply started showing up at the near end of the corral instead of the far end, standing there when they arrived, waiting, in the particular manner of something that has learned to expect a thing and has decided that expectation is safe. Colt watched this happen and said nothing, because some progress doesn't need commentary. It just needs to keep happening. She taught him by not teaching him. That was the thing he kept trying to understand and kept failing to understand satisfactorily. She didn't lecture, didn't demonstrate and say, "Now you try." Didn't hand him a list of rules or a method or a sequence of steps. She just did what she did, and he watched. And eventually his body started doing what his eyes had been learning, without his permission or conscious understanding. "You're holding your breath," she said one morning. He was. He hadn't known. When you approach the fence, you hold it. Ghost can feel the tension. Horses can feel held breath. Everything can feel held breath. She didn't look at him when she said it. She was watching Ghost, which was where her attention should be, and usually was. We think we're hiding things when we go quiet. We're not. We're just hiding the words. Everything else is louder. The breath. The shoulders. The way the hands want to grip something. All of it is louder when the words stop. Colt exhaled. Slowly. Deliberately. And Ghost's ears, which had been angled back toward him, shifted. Forward, the smallest fraction of a degree. The difference between wariness and provisional acceptance. "There," Mag said. He felt it. That tiny shift. The horse giving him something he hadn't asked for directly, because he'd finally stopped asking. Because the asking, the urgent wanting, the forward-leaning quality of his attention, had been the thing getting in the way. The horse could feel it. The horse had always been able to feel it. He understood something then, not about the horse, about himself, about why the mountains had always been easier than people. The mountains didn't care what he wanted. They simply were. And in the face of something that simply was, without expectation or preference, he could relax in a way he couldn't relax in the face of anything that had opinions about him. Mag was teaching him, without meaning to, how to be in the presence of another person without bracing, which was, it turned out, harder than he'd thought, and worth considerably more than he'd known to want. They talked more than he expected. Not about Druce or the debt or the arrangement hanging over them like weather. They talked around the edges of things, the way people do when the center is too loaded, and the edges are where you find out if someone is worth trusting. She told him about her father without being asked. One morning, when Ghost was particularly still, and the conversation had the quality that conversations get before dawn, when you're both cold and tired, and your defenses are running at minimum capacity. He could calm anything, she said, not just horses. Dogs that had been beaten, cattle that had gotten into a panic. Once a neighbor had some kind of breakdown in the field, couldn't stop shaking. My father went and sat beside him and talked, low and steady, the way he talked to animals, because he said people and animals are more alike than either of them wants to admit. Both of them just need to know the world isn't going to hurt them right. Now, did it work? The neighbor? Yes, she was quiet. He stopped shaking, eventually, not right away. But eventually. What happened to your father? He died when I was 19. Heart. Just. Stopped one morning. She paused. He went out to check on a foal and didn't come back. I found him in the stall. The foal was standing over him. Wouldn't let anyone else in. Took me an hour to convince her it was all right to step back. Ghost snorted softly, tossed his head once. Settled? That's a good death, Colt said. Mag looked at him. That's what most people would say, she said. I'm not most people. No, she said. After a moment. You're not. He told her about his father, without planning to. It came out sideways. The way things do when you haven't rehearsed them, and your guard is down. And the cold has been wearing at you for days. They were leaving the corral after a session. Ghost had let Colt stand within 6 feet without shifting, which was enormous, which Colt was not allowing himself to celebrate too hard. because Ghost had his own calendar and didn't consult anyone else's. And Colt said, without preamble, "My father left when I was 9. Mag kept walking. Didn't stop or make the sound that demands more. Just kept pace. No letter, no explanation, just gone one morning. My Uncle Reed came and got me 3 days later. Brought me to the mountain." Colt paused. "I didn't understand it for a long time. Then I thought I did. Then I didn't anymore. Which is it now?" He thought about it honestly. "I understand why a man runs. I don't understand why he doesn't say something first." Mag walked 3 more steps. "Some people don't have words for the things they're doing. They do the thing and the words never catch up. Is that an excuse?" "It's an explanation." She stopped at the edge of the corral yard and turned to face him. "I stopped needing it to be an excuse a long time ago. You get older, you realize people are mostly just people. Trying, failing, trying again. Or not." She held his gaze. "Not forgiving them is your right. Understanding them is just. Accurate." Colt looked at her. This woman who had been standing in the same town for 16 years, while the town walked past her and called her poor thing. Who was more settled, more certain, more genuinely herself than anyone he had met in years. "I'm going to find out who broke Ghost," he said. "I think I already know. But I want to be sure. What will you do with it?" "Tell you first," he said. "Then decide." Something moved in her face. "Brief. Gone all right," she said. "He found out on a Thursday, not through investigation. Through accident, which is how most true things surface. Not hunted down, but stumbled into when you're paying attention to something else. He was at the feed store waiting for a bag of oats to be weighed and tallied. 2 men at the back of the store, voices low, not aware of him behind the shelving unit. The name Silas. Then, the gray horse. Then, the word before. Colt stood very still and listened. Because in the mountains you learn that the best intelligence comes when you're patient enough to let it come to you rather than thrashing toward it. The conversation was not long, but it had a shape. Silas Vane had owned the horse. Not Ghost, a different name then, some barn name nobody used anymore. Had owned him 2 years prior. Had used him for a practice the older men still called breaking, which was the word for it when done without care. When the goal was submission rather than cooperation, when the horse came out the other side, technically rideable and fundamentally destroyed. Why? Because Silas had bet money on the horse, had lost, had taken the anger somewhere the horse couldn't argue with, then sold the animal to Reed Hadley for less than market value, to get rid of a problem he'd created. Reed, who had a kind heart under the rough exterior, had tried to work with Ghost himself and failed. Had left the horse in the corral, intending to ask around for help. When the heart that had been working hard for 70 years decided it was done, and Colt had inherited the horse and the debt and the problem that was not Ghost's problem at all. He paid for his oats, walked back, built the fire, sat in the chair, and felt the anger, real, complete, justified anger at what had been done to an animal that had done nothing wrong except to be unlucky in its ownership. He let himself feel it, because it deserved to be felt. But Mag's voice was in his head. "Don't do anything with it that I wouldn't do." He sat with the anger until it changed shape. Anger held long enough either makes you stupid or makes you strategic. He'd learned this in the mountains years ago, the hard way. You meet a bear and you feel fear, real and electric, and if you let it run you, you do the wrong thing. If you hold it, feel it, let it settle into something useful, you find the path out. He went to find Mag. She was at the schoolhouse. Late afternoon, the children gone, erasing the day's lesson from the board, with the methodical focus she brought to everything. Chalk dust rising around her like its own small weather. He knocked on the open door. She looked up. It was Silas Vane. He said. He watched her face, not surprise, more like confirmation, the expression of someone who suspected and is being proved right and is not happy about it. "Tell me," she said. He did. Brief, just the shape of it. She listened without moving. When he finished, she set the eraser on the chalk rail and turned to face him fully. "He's the one who's been warning you. About Ghost?" "Yes, showing up, offering advice. Wanting you to believe the horse can't be fixed, because if Ghost can't be fixed, I can't meet Druce's terms. And if I can't meet Druce's terms, I lose the land." Colt paused. "And Silas is right there to buy it." Mag was quiet. "The land has the water source," she said. Not a question. She had lived in this county for 16 years. Creek runs year-round. Only reliable water in the eastern quarter of the valley. She looked at him steadily. He planned this, mostly. Some of it's luck. Reed dying when he did. Druce being who he is. Colt felt the anger again. Different shape. Flatter and more useful. "I want to go over there and do what? Tell him I know, and after?" A pause. "I don't know after," Owen bared. She said, "Who?" "One of my students. 9 years old. Lives in the house that backs up to your corral yard." She picked up the eraser and set it down again. "He's been quieter than usual. Something's bothering him. I think he saw something the night Ghost got spooked. That was not an accident." And Colt realized. There had been a night, 2 weeks into the mornings, when he'd come to the corral at 5, and found Ghost pacing with white eyes and a cut on his left foreleg from throwing himself into the fence. The gate latched wrong from outside. He'd assumed wind. He had not assumed a person. He should have. "Owen saw something," Colt said. "I think so. I haven't pushed him. He's 9. She met his gaze. "Let me handle that part." "Why?" "Because you'll walk up to a 9-year-old and ask directly, and the child will shut down completely." Not unkind, just accurate. "Let me do what I do." Colt looked at the woman standing in her classroom. Chalk dust on her sleeve, the afternoon light catching the gray in her hair. "All right," he said, "and Silas?" "Not yet. If you go over there now, he knows we know. Right now, he thinks he's winning. Let him think that a little longer." Colt felt his jaw tighten. "I'm asking you to be patient," she said. "The same way you're asking Ghost to be patient." That landed. He didn't like it. "But it landed fine," he said. "Thank you. Don't thank me." "I might change my mind," the corner of her mouth. A small movement, almost a smile, "I know," she said. The next morning at the corral, Ghost came to 7 feet. 7 feet. Not 10, not 12. 7, close enough that Colt could hear the horse's breathing, could feel the warmth of it in the cold air as something almost perceptible. "Hold out your hand," Mag said quietly from the fence. "Not toward him. To the side. Just let it be there." Colt extended his right hand. Palm down, not offering, not reaching, just creating a shape in the air that the horse could choose to investigate or not, according to its own judgment and on its own timeline. Ghost's nostrils worked. His ears went forward, 1 step. 6 feet. The breath of the animal, visible in the cold air. Close enough now that Colt could smell the warm, hay and winter coat smell of him. The particular living smell of a large animal that has been outside in December, that has survived things, that is still here. Ghost stretched his neck, sniffed Colt's hand, pulled back. But didn't leave. Colt stood completely motionless. His heart was going at a pace he would never have admitted to. Because this was the thing. This was the moment when something that had decided people meant pain, decided to interrogate its own conclusion. To ask, is this one different? To take a risk no one had earned through anything except patience and consistency, and showing up in the cold before dawn and not demanding. Ghost sniffed his hand again, and then rested his muzzle, briefly, lightly, the weight of nothing, against Colt's palm. Not a pressure, not a weight, just contact. A choice, 3 seconds, maybe 4. Then the horse pulled back and walked to the center of the corral and stood there as though nothing had happened. Colt looked at Mag. She was looking at Ghost. But her eyes were bright in a way he hadn't seen before. The brightness of someone managing something they would not have wanted witnessed if they'd known they were being watched. "Don't make Halakit a celebration," she said. Her voice was controlled, almost steady. "He'll feel it." "Right," Colt said. He turned back to the corral. Breathed. kept his face composed. Inside, he was doing something that he would have described, if pressed, as a sort of private earthquake. Contained, structural. The kind of shift that doesn't announce itself, but changes everything it touches. Owen Baird was 9 years old, and had the serious, watchful face of a child who has learned that the world is full of things adults pretend not to notice. He came to Mag after school on a Thursday. Not because she asked, because he decided. She was stacking readers on the shelf when she heard the chair scrape. He'd come back in from the door, sat back down at his desk, looking at the wood grain of the surface as though it contained the answer to something. She kept stacking. Gave him time, Miss Hale. Owen. If you saw something, he stopped. Started again. If someone did something wrong and you saw it, but the person who did it is important. People respect him. He looked up. What do you do? Mag set the last reader on the shelf, turned around, came and sat in the chair beside his desk, not behind her own desk, not in the position of authority, beside him. Level. That's a hard question, she said. I know. What did you see, Owen? He looked at his hands. Back at her end, he told her. He'd been awake. Couldn't sleep. Lying in bed listening to the sounds of the night. He'd heard something at the Hadley corral, which backed up to the strip of land between his family's property and the Hadley place. He'd looked through his window. He'd seen a man. Not running, not hiding exactly. Moving with the deliberate ease of someone who didn't expect to be seen because they were certain everyone was asleep. Moving toward the corral with something in his hand. A cloth and a small lamp. Owen had watched. Because he was 9 and didn't entirely understand what he was watching, and because part of him thought maybe he was imagining it. As the man held the burning cloth near the base of the corral fence, just long enough to make a sound, to make heat, to make Ghost inside begin to scream, and then the man had gone, and Cord had come down the road 20 minutes later. Cord, who worked for Silas Vane, who wore boots with silver studs on the heels that Owen had memorized from a dozen Sundays. Sitting in the pew where he had a direct line of sight to them. He picked up what the other man left, Owen said. The cloth. Put it in his coat. And left. Mag was quiet. You're sure about the boots, she said. Yes. Did you see Cord's face? No, but I know those boots. He wears them every Sunday. Mag looked at the boy, 9 years old, sitting very straight. A small person carrying something heavy, with the specific dignity of a child, who has decided to trust an adult with it, and is waiting to see if that trust was earned. Thank you for telling me, she said. What will you do? Mag thought about Colt, about Ghost, about Silas Vane and his friendly handshake and his patient, months-long waiting. The right thing, she said. When the right moment comes, Owen nodded. He gathered his things and left. Mag sat alone in the empty classroom for a long while. She told Colt that evening. He stood in her doorway. He'd taken to stopping by after supper, which hadn't been planned or discussed, but had become a thing that happened. And she told him what Owen had said. She watched his face while she talked, watched the jaw tighten, the stillness that came over him. Not the calm stillness, the other kind. The stillness of something that has identified the direction of a threat. Colt. I don't, I said I know. He exhaled, slow and long. Silas went to this trouble because he's patient. He planned this over months. If I go over there now, he has an answer ready. He always has an answer ready. What do we do then, she said. We finish what we started. He looked at her directly. Ghost. We get Ghost where he needs to be. Then Drusey's condition is met and the land is mine and Silas has nothing. He paused. And Owen is 9 years old. His word against Silas Vane's. In this town. In 1887, I know. So we can't use it yet. But we don't throw it away either. No, he said. We don't throw it away. They stood in the cold at her doorway, not touching. Not near enough to touch. But close enough that the air between them was a different temperature than the air around them. There's something else, Mag said. He waited. Druce came to the school. Colt went still. He said he'd been making inquiries. That he'd heard I was helping you with the horse. She kept her voice level. He said he appreciated the stabilizing influence. His words. Like I was a piece of furniture. Something you put in a corner, and it makes the room look more settled. Colt said nothing. He repeated the condition, she said. Marriage. Or the horse. Fully rideable. In 10 days. 10 days. He's accelerating. Colt said yes. Why? He has other investments. Or he knows we're making progress and wants to close off the horse option before it makes the marriage arrangement irrelevant. She paused. Someone told him we were making progress. Someone with reason to want the deadline shortened. And the only person who had that reason. Silas, Colt said. They're working together. They have been from the start. The full shape of it settled between them. Silas, who wanted the land. Druce, who wanted certainty and didn't care how he got it. Two men with different goals pulling on the same rope, and Colt in the middle. And Mag, who had not asked to be any part of any of this. Also in the middle. I'm sorry, Colt said. She looked at him. You got pulled into this, he said. By people using your life as a term in a business arrangement. That's not right. And I'm part of the reason it happened. Mag was quiet for a long moment. You're not the reason, she said finally. Druce is the reason. Silas is the reason. You're just the person standing between me and them. She held his gaze, which, for the record, is not nothing. Something shifted in the air between them. Small, specific. The particular shift that happens when two people on either side of a distance both take one step closer without deciding to. 10 days, Colt said. 10 days, she confirmed. Then we use all 10. They did every morning, 5 o'clock, dark, cold, ghost at 7 feet, then 6, then 4, then 3. Which was close enough that Colt could feel the warmth of the horse's breath on his knuckles when he held his hand out to the side. Mag said less now. She'd taught him what he needed. Now she was present differently. Less instructor, more witness. Which was its own kind of thing. Day 6. Colt put his hand on Ghost's neck, just his palm, flat, still. Ghost's muscles moved under it. Tensed, held, considered, stayed. Colt breathed. Did not grip, did not rub, did not celebrate. Just let his hand be there, an offered thing. Something Ghost had the right to accept or withdraw from at any moment he chose. Ghost stayed. 20 seconds. 30, a minute when Colt finally moved his hand away. Ghost turned and looked at him with those deep, storm-colored eyes, and Colt looked back, and something passed between them that was not language but was not nothing. He turned to find Mag watching. She had both hands on the fence rail. Her face was open in a way he hadn't seen before. Not guarded. Not arranged into the careful neutral she kept for the world. Just moved. Your father would have liked him, she said quietly. Your father, he corrected. Mine didn't stay long enough for me to find out, she smiled then. A real one. Quick, surprised out of her. The kind that changes a face completely because it doesn't know it's being watched. Fair point, she said. Day 8. Colt put the saddle blanket on Ghost's back, not the saddle, just the blanket. Set it gently on the horse's back and stepped away, giving Ghost the full weight of the thing to feel, the smell of it, the unfamiliar pressure, the object that his nervous system associated, probably, with everything that had once hurt him. Ghost trembled, all 4 legs. The shaking of something fighting itself, every instinct saying run and the body choosing not to run anyway. Colt stood still, breathed, said, very quietly, it's just the blanket. Nothing is going to happen. I'm just standing here. Ghost trembled for 30 more seconds, then stopped. The blanket sat on his back like a fact. Colt looked at Mag. Day after tomorrow, she said. Saddle. The deadline's day 10. I know what day the deadline is. She looked at him directly. You're not ready to put the saddle on him today. You're too close to the deadline. You're thinking about Druce, he was. Absolutely thinking about Druce. And the 10 days, and the $4,000, and the land, and the creek, and all of it pressing on him like weather. Put the blanket away, she said. Tomorrow, blanket again. Day 10, saddle. If it's right, and if it's not, I lose the deal. Yes, steady. Clear. That's the risk. He looked at the horse. Trembling gone now, ears working slowly, processing the ordinary fact of a blanket on his back. And if I lose the deal, he said slowly. What about you? I'm not a what about you, she said. I'm a person, I know. I'm asking what the town does, what Druce does. If the conditions weren't met, the town will talk. It always does. I've survived 16 years of it, she paused. I'll survive this too. That's not what Colt. He stopped. Put the blanket away, she said. Come back tomorrow. He did. That night, Silas Vane came to his door, which was wrong in the specific way that a sound in the woods line is wrong when it comes from the direction you weren't watching. Silas stood on the porch with his hat in his hand and his friendly face fully assembled and said he'd heard the deadline was approaching and wanted to help. Help, Colt said. I have a buyer for the land. Fair price. More than fair, given the debt. You'd walk away clear. Start somewhere else, somewhere easier. The cheekbones only smile. No shame in it. This land broke your uncle. Who's the buyer? Colt said. A brief pause. I'd need to keep that confidential. That's a no from me, Colt said. Colt, my name is Mr. Hadley to you. Quiet. No heat. Just clear. And I know what you did to the horse. I know what Cord did to the corral. And I know why. I'm not selling. Not to you. Not to whoever you're representing. And I'm done having this conversation. He closed the door, stood with his back against it. His hands were shaking, not from fear, from the effort of not doing more. He stood there until the shaking stopped, then went to the window and watched Silas Vane walk back down the path at the same unhurried pace, hat on his head, not looking back, pattered. Still patient, which was more frightening than anger. Die-9 the saddle, not because the deadline was tomorrow, because Ghost was ready. You know when a horse is ready, the same way you know when weather is changing. Not one sign, but a collection of them. The way he stood when Colt approached, the way his breathing had smoothed, the way the blanket had become ordinary, the way he'd started moving toward Colt in the mornings rather than waiting to be approached. Ready doesn't mean unafraid. Ready means afraid and choosing anyway. Colt put the saddle on Ghost's back. Ghost's head came up, ears pinned. 3 seconds of complete statue-still tension, then down. Slow exhale, the saddle stayed. Colt stood at Ghost's shoulder for 20 minutes, letting the saddle be a fact, an ordinary thing, something that existed without consequence. Mag was at the fence. Had not said a word this morning. Had arrived at 5 and stood there and watched, understanding that today was not a day for instruction. Today was for witnessing. After 20 minutes, Colt gathered the reins, looked at Ghost. Ghost looked back. I know, Colt said quietly. To the horse. I know it's a lot. He put his foot in the stirrup, paused. Weight in the stirrup but not in the saddle. Gave Ghost the full weight of the intention before the action. The courtesy of a moment to decide. Ghost shifted. Not a lunge, a recalibration. Colt settled into the saddle and Ghost stood 4 seconds. 10, 20. Still, then Colt let out a long, controlled breath and Ghost took 1 step forward, then another, and they moved around the corral. Slowly, in the winter morning light, 2 creatures who had learned to trust each other through the accumulated weight of patience. Mag had both hands over her mouth when he came around on the second circuit. Her eyes were bright. Her shoulders were something that he understood from 40 feet away. Was the effort of not making a sound. He brought Ghost to a stop near the fence. She dropped her hands. Day 10 tomorrow, she said. In front of Druce? Yes. And it'll be fine, yes, she nodded. Reached through the fence rails and put her hand briefly on Ghost's nose. Ghost leaned into it, barely, the pressure of nothing, the weight of a choice. And the thing in Colt's chest that had been building for 9 mornings pressed against the inside of him, with the specific weight of something that has become too large for the space it was put in. He dismounted. Stood beside Ghost. Mag. When tomorrow is done. When? I want to. I need to. He stopped. Tried again. I don't know how to say this. I'm not someone who then don't, she said. Not yet. He looked at her. Tomorrow first, she said. Say it after. He held her gaze, nodded once, took Ghost back to the barn. Inside, the horse let him remove the saddle without tension, stood still for the brush, ate from Colt's palm. Oats, the good ones he'd been saving, with the deliberate manners of something that has decided, finally, that this hand is safe. Colt stood in the barn for a long time after, listening to Ghost breathe, because Druce had not been to the corral in 4 days. And men like Druce did not go quiet, because things were going well. They went quiet because they were changing the terms. Tomorrow was not just the demonstration. Tomorrow was when they found out what kind of man Harlan Druce actually was. The night before day 10 came on cold and full of stars. The kind of stars you only get in Wyoming in December. Not the gentle summer stars, not the romantic stars of mild evenings. These were the serious ones. Winter stars. Burning hard and cold through air so clear, it might have been glass. Each one so bright it seemed to have something to say if you could figure out the language. Colt sat by the fire. He was thinking about Reed, his uncle who had lived on this land for 30 years and died in a barn with no one to find him for 3 days. And had left everything. The debt, the horse, the problem, to the only person left who shared his blood. He had not known Reed well. They had written sometimes. Reed was not a talker or a writer. He sent out letters once or twice a year. Brief, practical reports on weather and cattle, and one memorable one about a family of foxes who had taken up residence in his east pasture. Colt had kept that letter, didn't know why. Just had. He thought about Ghost. About the horse that had been broken by someone who saw only utility. Only the measure of what a thing could produce and what it cost when it couldn't. About how long it took to repair something like that. About how repair wasn't even the right word, because you didn't get back to before. You built something new on the foundation of before. Something that knew what fear felt like and had chosen anyway. Something that was not the horse before the damage, but was also not the horse during the damage. Something new. Something that had been through it and come out the other side, with a different kind of knowledge. He thought about Mag, the blue door. The way she descended those church steps last, Sunday after Sunday, because there was no one waiting. The way she had made conditions out of dignity and held to them without flinching. The way she was not what anyone in this town had bothered to see. The way she was, in fact, the most real person he had met in years. He thought about his father, who had left without words, who he had become in some ways, by being the opposite of, by being someone who didn't leave. Staying in the mountains, yes, but staying, committed to the place, present to the weather and the terrain and the particular, unrepeatable reality of where he was. He had never applied that to a person, had never stayed rooted to a person. Because the mountain doesn't ask you to be vulnerable. The mountain asks you to be capable, skilled, tough, resourceful in the way of someone who has no one to rely on but themselves. Staying rooted to a person asks something different. It asks you to be seen, to let someone watch you fail and stay anyway. To let someone close enough that when they leave, if they leave, the leaving means something. Which was harder? Which was, he suspected, the thing he had been avoiding for 31 years by being very good at being alone and calling it freedom. The fire burned low. He let it. He thought about what he would do with the land if he kept it. Not the abstract keeping, not the legal document, not the 15% and the extended repayment and Druce's signature beside his. The actual keeping, the day after day of it. The kind of presence that Reed had given this land for 30 years, that had worn grooves in the floors and given character to the fence posts, and made the barn smell like something specific rather than just any barn anywhere. He would get the roof of the house fixed properly. He knew a man, or Reed had known a man, which came to the same thing, who did stonework in the summer months. He would get the east fence replaced with wood instead of wire. He would get the east corral gate rehung so it swung without catching. Small things, the kind of things that take years to add up to anything, but they added up. He thought about the school, about the bucket in the corner under the leak, about a woman who had moved her desk 3 feet to the left and said nothing about it to anyone, and just kept showing up, year after year, because the children needed her to show up. He thought about spring, about a blue door that might, come spring, become a ranch door's new color, about the creek that would run clear through June and July, when other creeks dried up, and what that would be worth in a dry year. About Ghost in the spring, about what Ghost be like when the cold finally broke and the grass came back, and there was sun in the corral for more than a few hours a day. About whether Ghost had ever had a spring that wasn't spent being afraid. About what it looked like to watch something that had been broken start, slowly, to become itself again. In the morning, he would put a saddle on Ghost in front of Harlan Druce and the witnesses Druce had brought, and the horse would carry him around the corral, and the terms of the deal would be met. And then there was something else he needed to do. Not the deal, not the debt, something smaller and larger than both. He went to sleep thinking about a woman standing at a fence before dawn, talking to something frightened, in the dark, without being asked, without expecting anything back. Just because it needed doing, and because she knew how. That, he thought, was its own kind of courage, not the dramatic kind, not the standing in front of a crowd kind, not the refusing a powerful man kind, not the kind anyone would have noticed from the outside or told stories about. Just the daily, quiet, unseen courage of showing up when you're not required to, of giving your attention to something frightened and asking nothing in return. He was learning it. It was harder than it looked. Worth it. He let the fire go fully out and slept. Day 10 arrived quietly, no announcement, no particular quality of light. Just the same gray Wyoming December morning, indifferent to what the humans below had decided to make of it. Colt was at the corral before 4. Hadn't slept past 3:30. Lying in the dead man's bed, staring at the ceiling, had felt worse than doing something, so he'd gotten up, built the fire, drank coffee standing at the window, watched the dark yard and the barn and the corral where Ghost was a darker shape inside the darkness. One thought cycling. Just one. Don't rush it, whatever Druce does, whatever the day becomes. Don't rush the horse. Mag arrived at 5. Exactly 5. 2 minutes after him, same as always. Which meant she hadn't slept much either. They stood at the fence and looked at Ghost. Ghost looked back. His breath made slow shapes in the cold air. The breathing of something that had learned. Finally, that morning meant the same people and the same patience, and nothing to be afraid of. "How are you?" Mag said. A real question. "Nervous." He said. She looked at him, because Colt Hadley did not say nervous. Nervous was a new word from him, and they both knew it. "Good," she said. "Good means you know what it costs." Men who aren't nervous before something important either don't understand what they're doing or don't care about the outcome. "Which one are you?" he said. "Terrified," she said simply. "Have been since Tuesday." That surprised him. He let it show. She almost smiled. "I'm better at hiding it. 16 years of practice." 16 years of practice, she confirmed. Ghost moved toward the fence. Halfway. The distance he'd settled into as his. Close enough to be present, far enough to have options. "Whatever Druce does today," Colt said. "Whatever he says after. I need you to know something." Mag was quiet. "This was never about the deal for me. Not after the first week." He kept his eyes on Ghost. "Easier that way. The horse is real. What happened here is real. That doesn't change depending on what Druce decides to do with it." Silence. Long enough that he thought maybe he'd said too much. "Then I know," she said. Just that. But the way she said it, like she'd been waiting to hear it, and hadn't known she was waiting. Druce arrived at 9, with 2 witnesses from Cheyenne, and a crowd that had assembled because word had moved through Harrow Falls the way it always did, fast and hungry, Silas Vane was there too. Of course he was. Mag stood at the fence, not beside Colt publicly. At her section of fence, the section she always stood at, the section Ghost had come to associate with her presence. There as herself, not as anything else. Colt went into the corral. No performance. No showmanship. He walked in the way he'd walked in every morning for 10 days. Even, unhurried, present. He went to the center and stood, and Ghost turned toward him and came. Not all the way, halfway, then 3/4. Then close enough that Colt could rest his hand on the horse's neck. The crowd was quiet, because they had seen what Ghost did to other men. They knew what this horse was supposed to be, and what they were seeing was not that. Colt got the saddle blanket. Ghost stood the saddle. Slow, deliberate, each step given time. Ghost's ears went back for 2 seconds. Came forward again. Colt put his foot in the stirrup. Paused. The full weight of the intention before the action. The courtesy of a moment to decide. And then he was in the saddle and Ghost walked smooth. Unhurried. The walk of an animal that has decided, based on accumulated evidence, that this is safe. On the third circuit, Ghost broke into a trot, his head up, ears forward, moving like the horse he had always been underneath everything that had been done to him. When Colt brought him to a stop, the crowd made a sound. Not applause, something more complicated. The sound of people revising conclusions they'd been comfortable with. Druce said nothing for a moment. Then, "All right, Mr. Hadley. Well done." Colt dismounted, handed Ghost to the barn hand he'd hired. Came back to Druce. They stepped away from the crowd. Silas moved closer, within hearing distance if he wanted to be. Druce laid out the original offer. 15% equity, extended repayment, reasonable interest. Then he reached into his coat. "I've added a provision," Druce said. "Papers. Unfolded with precise movements, a cosigner. A local party with established community standing, Margaret Hale. She's been here 16 years. Owns her property outright. A character guarantee, her signature indicating confidence in the operation." Colt was very still, and if she signs and the operation fails, her property would serve as secondary collateral. Druce refolded the papers. Standard practice, like Mag's house. The blue door. The chalk-dusted sleeves and the books on the shelf, and the 16 years of building something hers, in a world that had given her very little else. Colt looked up, past Druce, at Silas. Standing 12 feet away, looking at a spot 4 feet to the left of Colt, with the elaborate casualness of a man pretending he wasn't listening. And Colt understood this was Silas. This specific, targeted, calculated provision. Druce would want a cosigner from Cheyenne, from his own network, not from a small-town schoolteacher. Silas had fed this to Druce, shaped the terms, because if Colt signed Mag into the agreement, either outcome served Silas. Success meant a poisoned relationship, failure meant Mag's house how. Either way, something damaged that didn't belong to him. Colt took the papers, read them, took his time, every word, because he was a man who had learned patience in 10 days of mornings, and he was going to use it now. Then he set them on the fence rail. "No," he said. Druce looked at him. "No," Colt said again, clear, clean, the word taking up exactly the space it needed. "No one signs anything involving that woman except that woman. Not me, not you. Not anybody who thinks her name is a useful asset to put on a document." He handed the papers back. "If you want a cosigner, find one in Cheyenne. If the deal doesn't work without this provision, then the deal doesn't work." Silence. The two Cheyenne witnesses exchanged a look. Druce looked at Colt with those calibrated gray eyes. "You understand what you're walking away from?" "Yes, $4,000. The note due in March. Without restructuring, there's no path to keeping the land. I understand. You'd lose everything your uncle built, then I lose it." He held Druce's gaze. "But I lose it clean." Without her name on it, a long pause. "You know," Druce said slowly, "I've been in investments for 20 years. I've met men who negotiated well. Men who were shrewd. Men who knew how to work an angle." He paused. I don't often meet men who know what they won't do. Colt said nothing. The provision comes out, Druce said. The original terms, 15%. Extended repayment. No cosigner, he refolded the papers. Monday. Price's office, he turned and walked toward the hotel. Colt stood at the fence, his heart going at a pace he would absolutely never admit to, because he had not been certain. He had made the decision and meant every word of it. But he had not known, when he said no, whether Druce would fold or walk. He had just known that no was the only word available to him. Some decisions are like that. You don't choose them because you're certain of the outcome. You choose them because you're certain of who you are. He turned around. Silas Vane was still there, arms crossed, hat low. The friendly face not quite assembled correctly, the way a mask sits wrong when the person wearing it has stopped concentrating on the wearing. Colt walked toward him, not fast, just toward him. Silas straightened. Quite a show, Hadley. Don't, Colt said. Silas stopped. I know about Ghost, Colt said. I know about Cord and the corral and the burning cloth. I know about the water source and why you want this land and how long you've been waiting for the chance. He stopped 3 feet from Silas. Close enough. Not aggressive, just present. Unavoidable. I'm not going to hit you. I'm not going to the sheriff with something that I'm a year-old's word against yours in 1887. He paused. But I'm going to stay on that land, and I'm going to build something on it. And every time you look east, you're going to see it, and you're going to know I know, and that's going to be your life. Silas's jaw moved once. He tried once, opened his mouth, looked at the faces around him, closed it again. Some arguments you can't win not because the evidence is against you, but because the room has already decided. And rooms, once decided, don't reopen easily. We're done, Colt said. He walked away. Did not look back. And it felt, for the first time since he'd ridden into Harrow Falls, like walking in the right direction. He found Mag at the schoolhouse. Another day of lessons. Another set of problems. The ordinary ongoing work of a woman who showed up every day, regardless of what was happening outside the schoolhouse door. She heard him and turned. He told her about the provision, about what Druce had asked, about what he'd said. She listened without interrupting, standing with the eraser in her hand, chalk dust on her sleeve, those steady gray eyes on his face. When he finished, she was quiet. The kind of quiet that has weight. You turned down the deal, she said finally, and then Druce put the deal back. Without the provision, but you didn't know he would. No, she looked at him. You turned down $4,000, she said. Because he wanted my signature. Yes. That's... She stopped. She turned away from him, put the eraser down on the chalk rail, put both hands flat on the board for a moment like she needed something solid. She turned back. Her eyes were bright, not overflowing. Just bright. Thank you, she said. Mag, he said. And then, because he'd learned something in 10 mornings at a corral fence about the cost of not saying things when they needed saying, he said the rest of it. I said I'd say it after, he told her. After day 10. She went still. It's after. She waited. I don't want you to be a solution, he said. Or a cosigner. Or an arrangement. Or a poor thing. He held her gaze. I want to know what happens next. With you. Whatever that looks like. Whatever you'd consider, he paused. I'm aware I'm not easy. I don't know towns. I don't know people the way you know people. I've spent my whole life being good at being alone. And I think I might have been wrong about whether that was the same as being happy. She said nothing. He kept going. You taught a damaged horse that not everything with hands trying to hurt him, he said. I'd like the chance to prove the same thing to you. If that's something you'd consider. The classroom was very quiet. Outside, wind. The ordinary sounds of a winter town. Inside, just the two of them. And the question between them. Like a horse at 6 feet, waiting, giving the other party the choice. I'd consider it, Mag said. Not dramatic. Not a declaration, just true. He proposed 3 days later, not on one knee, not with rehearsed words. In the ranch kitchen, early morning before the sun was up. when she'd come by to check on Ghost, and he'd made coffee, and they were standing on opposite sides of the kitchen table. The coffee was the reason she'd come, she said. He said nothing about the fact that she came every morning now, with or without a stated reason, and that her presence in the kitchen in the early dark had become, without either of them deciding anything, a fixed point of his day. It came out before he'd finished deciding to say it. "Marry me?" he said. She looked at him over her cup. "That's not a question, it is. I said it wrong." He tried again. "Will you marry me?" Better. Slightly. "Why?" she said. Not a challenge question. She wanted to know. She was a woman who had been offered things before, pity, condescension, the particular brand of helpfulness that is really just another form of control. And she had learned to ask why before accepting anything. "Because I turned 32 in April, and I've spent 31 years being capable and self-sufficient and entirely alone, and I'd like to try the other thing." He paused. "With you specifically. Not with the concept. Not with the arrangement that Druce proposed. With you." She set down the cup. "I need you to understand something first. Tell me, my work stays mine. The school, the children, whatever else I do or want to do. It doesn't become secondary because I'm someone's wife. It doesn't become something I do in the gaps between being useful to someone else. Yes, my voice carries the same weight as yours in decisions about this property, more on some things. You understand this land and this community better than I do. Ghost knew that before I did." A pause. "Then, and if people talk, they'll say you only chose me because what? Because no one else would have you, a beat. Or because you needed a solution. Or because..." Mag, she stopped. He looked at her. This woman who had spent 16 years being looked past by a town that only noticed her when it could use her as an example. Who had built her worth quietly, without audience, brick by brick, year by year. In the chalk-dusted mornings of a schoolroom where children came in not knowing things and left knowing more. "I don't care what they say," he said. "I've never lived in a town before. I don't know the rules. Which means I also don't know what I'm supposed to care about. I don't know who I'm supposed to be impressive to." He held her gaze. "I care about what's true. What's true is that you are the most real person I have met in my life. And I would like you to be in my life. Permanently. If you'll have me." She looked at him for a long time. This rough, quiet, patient, honest man who had ridden in from the mountains, with nothing but a horse and a debt, and the mountain man's particular inability to pretend things were other than they were, who had stood in a corral in the cold and learned patience from a damaged horse, and hadn't once complained about the difficulty of it, who had refused to put her name on a document without her consent, even when it would have saved him everything he stood to lose, who had looked at her, actually looked, not past her, not through it, and seen what was there. "Yes," she said, "just that." And it was enough. It was, in fact, exactly enough. They were married on a Saturday, not a big Saturday, not a planned, decorated, invitations sent Saturday. A small one, the minister, 2 witnesses, the cold. Emmett Price, the lawyer, who was surprised to be asked and clearly pleased in a way he tried to contain, and couldn't quite, and Clara Dunn, who had taught alongside Mag for 3 years in the leaking schoolhouse, and who cried before the ceremony started, and was entirely unapologetic about it, which Mag found she did not mind at all. Clara's crying was honest. It was the honest kind, the kind that comes from genuine feeling rather than performance. And Mag had had enough performance to last her the rest of her life. The church was empty except for them. Cold. The wood stove in the corner making its best effort without quite winning. Mag wore her good dress. Dark green, the one she kept for occasions. Her hair pinned up with the 2 shell combs that had been her mother's, which she had carried from one house to another through 16 years of Harrow Falls, and had never once considered leaving behind. Colt wore the cleanest version of himself he could produce. He had worked on this considerably, had pressed what could be pressed, had polished what could be polished, and the result still had the quality of a mountain in a Sunday coat. Something essentially itself, regardless of what you put on it. She found this, privately, reassuring. The minister spoke. Colt listened with the focused attention he gave to things that mattered. Not performing attention, actually attending. Hearing each word and meaning the response to it. When it came to the vows, he said them slowly, like he was making a note in the part of himself that kept records of things that were permanent. Mag said hers the same way, not rushed, not emotional in the performed sense. The specific reality of a person who has decided something and is saying so out loud, in front of witnesses, with full understanding of what it means. When the minister nodded, there was a moment, a brief, uncertain, human moment, the kind that exists in the space between the formal and the real. Colt looked at her. She looked at him, and then he leaned forward and kissed her. Brief, careful, the kind of kiss that is not a destination but a beginning, that says, "This is the first one, there will be others. We have time." That doesn't try to be more than it is, because what it is turns out to be quite a lot. When he pulled back, she exhaled, small, controlled. But he heard it. Good, he thought. Good. They walked home in the cold, together, the same direction at the same pace, which had become natural, without either of them having decided to make it unnatural. At the fork where Birch Street split from the main road, they stopped. "The blue door," he said. She looked at him. "It should come with you. Paint the ranch door." She looked at the direction of her house. At the blue door she had maintained for 16 years. It's a good door, it is, a moment. Maybe in spring is good, they went to the ranch. She didn't bring everything at once. That wasn't her way. She brought what she needed for the week and went back for more. The schoolhouse still needed her in the mornings, and the children didn't care that she'd just gotten married. Which she found, privately, a relief. They needed the same things from her they'd always needed. The consistency of it was a comfort. The storm came 9 days later. Not a big storm by Wyoming standards, just the wind coming down from the north, the temperature dropping past reasonable, into something that had given up on having conversations with reason, and the snow arriving sideways. Colt was in the barn when it started. He heard Ghost before he heard the wind change. The horse going restless first, ears working, feet moving, the animal weather sense that was always 40 minutes ahead of human perception. Then the wind hit, fast, hard. The east section of the corral fence, patched but not replaced, which Colt had been meaning to fix, took the first gust wrong. He heard it go, ran from the barn. Too late, Ghost was already through. Not bolting blindly, moving fast purposefully into the dark and the snow and the wind. Colt ran. He was fast for a large man. Not fast enough. He heard Ghost scream from somewhere to the northeast. Not pain, panic, the old panic. The deep one that lived underneath 10 days of patience and building, because some things live very deep and come back when the world gets loud enough. Colt moved toward the sound, lost his footing on ice, down hard on his right knee, got up, kept moving. The wind took his lamp dark then, complete Wyoming winter dark with snow in it. He stopped, tried to hear. Ghost again. To the right, closer he moved. And then he heard something else, a voice low, even, cutting through the wind, not by being louder than it, but by being steady, consistent, the same rhythm it had always been. The voice that Ghost's nervous system had catalogued as the opposite of pain, had learned to turn toward the way a compass turns. Mag, she was there. He found her by following Ghost's stillness, because Ghost had gone still, not fallen still, choosing still, in the middle of the field with the snow sideways and the wind trying to take everything. Ghost had stopped. Because Mag was in front of him. She was not prepared for this. Her everyday coat, not the heavy one. Her indoor boots. She had come out of their house in the clothes she'd been wearing by the fire. She was soaked. Her hands were shaking with cold. She was talking to Ghost, low and steady and completely consistent, the same way she talked to him in the quiet early mornings when the world was still and manageable. Ghost's head was up, but his feet were still. Colt stopped 6 feet behind her, breathing hard. Did not move because he knew this, had learned it so thoroughly it was reflex. You do not interrupt. You do not bring your urgency into a space someone else has made careful. He stood in the snow and the cold and the dark and watched. Mag took 1 step forward. Ghost trembled, full body, the shaking of something fighting itself. Every instinct saying run, and something deeper saying no. She took another step, reached out her hand. Ghost put his nose against her palm, and stopped trembling, just stopped. Like a switch. Like the accumulated weight of 10 mornings and 10 days of consistent, patient, honest presence had built something stronger than panic. Something that held, in the middle of a Wyoming winter storm, with the wind trying and the snow coming and the cold making its arguments, it held. Mag took the halter. Gently, no sudden movement, turned and walked Ghost back toward the barn, and Ghost walked with her. Colt moved alongside, giving them space. Matching the pace, they got Ghost into his stall, latched. Safe pressed his nose against the stall door and breathed. Long, slow, recovering breaths. Colt looked at his wife. She was dripping, shaking from cold. Her hair had come entirely loose, soaked flat against her face. Doing the thing people do when they are very cold, and trying to breathe evenly and not let the cold win. Mag, he said. I'm all right, she said immediately. I'm all right. She looked at Ghost settling. He's all right too. Colt looked at her, this woman, who had run out of a warm house into a December storm, in the wrong coat and wrong boots, and stood in a dark field, and talked a panicking horse into stillness because it needed doing. Because she knew how. Because that was who she was, had always been, and had needed exactly no one's recognition to continue being. He crossed the distance and put both arms around her. She went still for half a second, then put her arms around him in return. Pressed her forehead against his shoulder and held on. They stood in the barn, the storm outside, Ghost breathing behind them, the lamp swinging on its hook. The morning after the storm came pale and exhausted, the way mornings do after nights that tried too hard. The light thin and tentative, the air still carrying the cold but having spent the violence of it. The landscape outside, rearranged slightly from how it had been. A fence board here that hadn't been here before. A drift of snow against the barn wall that changed the shape of the yard. Word had moved through Harrow Falls overnight, as it always did. Something had happened at the Hadley Ranch. The storm, the horse, a woman seen crossing the field in the dark. By the time the sun was properly up, people had gathered, not a crowd exactly. Enough. Men with tools who had come, because that is what men in small towns sometimes do when something goes wrong, to see about the fence. Neighbors with nothing specific to offer but their presence, which is its own kind of thing. A few women who had somehow, without coordination, produced food. Biscuits wrapped in cloth, a jar of preserves, a covered pot of something warm, and Silas Vane. Of course, he was near the back, arms folded. He had the look of a man who had come to assess damage and had found the damage was not as useful as he'd hoped. The look of someone recalculating. Colt came out of the barn. He'd been there since before dawn, checking on Ghost, repairing what he could of the fence from the inside, letting the horse settle in the way that animals settle after a night that cost them something. Gradually, with frequent checking of whether the world had gone back to being what it had been before. He saw the crowd. He saw the fence crew. He saw Silas. He came to the fence and he said, "I need to tell you all something." Not loud. But people always hear the voice that sounds like it means what it says. He told them about Ghost, not the dramatic version. Not the story with the arc and the climax and the villains clearly labeled, the plain version. The horse had been owned by Silas Vane, had been broken down deliberately over 2 years, had been sold to Reed Hadley as a problem, because Silas had wanted rid of it. Reed had not known. Colt had not known, He told them about the corral, about the night someone had used burning cloth to panic Ghost, about cord and the silver-studded boots, about the specific, patient, deliberate effort to make sure Colt failed before he could manage what he'd inherited, about the water source, about what the creek meant, about what the land was worth, and who had wanted it and how long the wanting had been underway, and how much of it had been planned. He said it all plainly, without drama, without accusation he couldn't back up, just facts, delivered in the sequence they'd happened, with the names attached. The crowd was quiet when he finished, the particular quiet of people processing something they hadn't expected. Not silence. There were sounds, the wind, the creak of the repaired fence, someone shifting their weight, but the voices had stopped. The murmuring had stopped. Then a voice from near the fence, Miss Hale. Is that true? And Mag, who had come to stand 2 steps behind Colt, who had not asked permission and did not need it, said, yes, 1 word, 16 years of standing in this town. 16 years of being looked past and looked through and looked at only when someone needed her to be an example of something. 16 years of being poor thing and never married and still teaching. In 1 word that carried all of those years in it, compact and plain and completely without apology. Yes, another voice, and the burning cloth. The corral. Did someone see that? And then Owen Baird, 9 years old, standing at the edge of the crowd with his mother's hand on his shoulder, not holding him back, just there. Present, her hand on his shoulder in the way that says, I know what you're going to do, and I'm not stopping you, and I'm right here. His cap was in his hands, both hands clutching it. His face was composed with the specific, effortful seriousness of a child who has been carrying something heavy and has decided that today, after thinking about it, and asking Miss Hale what to do, and lying awake and deciding, is the day to set it down. He stepped forward 1 step, into the space between the crowd and the fence, into the space where the adults were, where the decision was, where the weight was. He told what he saw. His voice was not loud. It was a child's voice, carrying the particular quality of a child speaking about something real. People leaned in, not because they couldn't hear him, but because there is something about a child telling the truth, simply, without performance, without understanding yet how rare that is, that makes you want to lean toward it, said, Histe, cord, the silver studs on the heels, the cloth, the lamp. What he'd heard, and what he'd seen from the window of his room in the house that backed up to the Hadley corral, the night he couldn't sleep and looked out and saw what he saw and didn't know what to do with it, until Miss Hale told him it was all right to say. He was 9 years old, and he stood there in the cold with his cap in his hands and said it in front of everyone. When he finished, nobody spoke for a moment. Then someone said Silas Vane's name, not at Colt, not as a question addressed to anyone. Just said it, into the air. In the way you say a name when you're looking at the person it belongs to, and you want them to know you're looking. Silas opened his mouth, closed it. The crowd looked at him. Not angry, not in the way that mobs get angry, not hot and demanding. Just looking, with the particular quality of people who have been waiting without knowing they were waiting for something to be said plainly. And now that it's been said plainly, are simply registering the fact of it. He tried once, and hid once, opened his mouth, looked at the faces around him, and understood something about faces and what they were saying. Some arguments you can't win, not because the evidence is against you, but because the room has already decided. And rooms, once decided, don't reopen. Silas Vane had spent 47 years building a particular kind of standing in Harrow Falls. Not beloved, he had never been that, but respected. The kind of respect that comes from money and consistency, and never being caught doing the thing everyone suspected you capable of doing. The kind of respect that is really just the absence of evidence to the contrary. He had been caught not in a courtroom, not by the sheriff, who was not here and had not been called, by a 9-year-old boy who had decided that the truth was worth saying, even to a room full of adults, even about a person who was important and who people respected. He left the crowd without speaking. Nobody stopped him. Nobody had to, because there is a kind of judgment that doesn't require a gavel. That lives in the air between people, in the way they stand, in the way they look. That settles into the ground of a place and becomes part of it. Becomes the kind of thing people remember when they think about that December and that ranch and what happened there. He was gone before noon. Cord left with him. 2 men moving away from Harrow Falls, taking with them the particular silence of people who have run out of options. The fence crew stayed. They fixed the corral. They worked quietly and efficiently, and when they were done, the fence was better than it had been before the storm. And Colt didn't ask them to do it, and they didn't ask to be paid. That was the other kind of town. The one underneath the gossip. The one that showed up sometimes. When it mattered, Owen Baird left with his mother. He was 9 years old, and he had said what he needed to say, and now he wanted biscuits and to go home, which was reasonable. Mag watched him go. She would think about that for a long time. About what it meant that a 9-year-old had stood up in front of everyone and said the true thing, because someone had spent 16 years teaching children that the true thing was worth saying. About whether any of it takes. About whether they carry it with them when they leave the room. She thought, this one carried it out the door and into the December morning and said it in front of the whole town. That took. That more than took. Drewis came to the ranch that afternoon, his coat on, as always. He stood in the yard, and Colt came out to meet him, and they looked at each other in the December light. The flat, exhausted light of a Wyoming afternoon in December, when the sun is already thinking about leaving, and the cold is already moving in to fill the space. I heard, Drews said. Most of the town heard. Vain. A pause. He came to me before your uncle died. Did you know that? Colt went still. 2 months before Reed passed. Vane told me the land would likely become available. Suggested I position myself early. A pause. Something in Drews's expression. Not guilt exactly, but its cousin. The look of a man who has realized he was used as a tool and doesn't care for the feeling. I didn't ask how he knew. He knew because he was watching for it, Colt said. Yes, I understand that now. He paused. I owe you an apology for the marriage condition. It was a business calculation. I understand now that it was also using a person as a condition in a transaction they hadn't agreed to. That was not well considered. No, Colt said. It wasn't. I'm saying so. I heard you. Drews looked at him steadily then. She is formidable. Your wife? Yes, Colt said. She is. Drews held out his hand. Colt shook it. Not warmly, not coldly. The handshake of 2 people who have arrived at a workable arrangement, who understand what it is and what it isn't, and who are prepared to proceed on those terms. Monday, Drews said. Documents. Price's office. Monday. Colt agreed. Drews left. Colt stood in the yard for a moment after he'd gone, looking at the land. The corral fence newly repaired. The barn with its lamp on. The house behind him where a fire was going. 412 acres. A creek that ran year-round. A debt that was no longer due in March. His uncle's land. His now. It felt, for the first time, like his. Not like an inheritance. Not like a problem left to him by a dead man. Not like a thing he was managing, because he had no choice. Like something he had worked for. Something he had decided to stay for, at some point between the first morning at the corral fence and now, without quite deciding it consciously. The way the best decisions sometimes happen. And the land was Colt's, just like that. As simple and as complicated as everything real. That evening, the fire going, the storm's aftermath settling into ordinary cold. Mag was at the table with papers. Student work, end-of-term assessments. The quiet ongoing labor, the quiet ongoing labor of someone who does not stop doing her work because other things are also happening, who has never needed the world to pause and acknowledge what she's doing before she continues doing it. Colt sat across from her, not talking, not performing comfortable silence, just in it, the particular quality of being in a room with someone without needing to manage the being in a room with someone. The ease that takes time to build and cannot be rushed, and is, once built, one of the more underrated things two people can have. He had not known he was missing this. He had not known there was this to miss. Ghost was in the barn, calm. Colt had checked 3 times, and would not have admitted to a 3rd time under any circumstances. "He'll be fine," Mag said without looking up from the papers. "I know. You checked 3 times." "Twice, 3. She looked up, the corner of her mouth. That small movement, that was not quite a smile but was the thing that came before a smile. The thing that was in some ways better than a smile because it was less decided, more honest. It had become, in the weeks since he'd first seen it, one of his fixed points. The things you fix yourself by. The last time you were gone 20 minutes. The latch needed checking. The latch was fine when you went. He said nothing. She smiled properly. "Put her papers down, Colt." "Yes, today was a lot." "Yes, Owen." She shook her head slightly. 9 years old. "He's your student, he is." She looked at her hands, folded on the table. "He learned it somewhere, that it was worth saying. That the truth is worth saying, even when the person you're saying it about is important and powerful, and the room is full of adults who ought to be the ones saying it." Colt thought about what she meant. About a 9-year-old standing in the cold, with his cap in his hands and saying what he'd seen because someone had been teaching him, every day in a chalk-dusted classroom, what truth was worth and why it was worth saying. "You taught him," Colt said. "I taught all of them." She looked up. "I've been teaching here for 16 years, and sometimes I wonder if any of it takes. If they carry it with them when they leave, or if it just evaporates, disappears when they walk out the door. If it's mine in the room and only mine in the room." He looked at her, this woman, who had shown up every morning for 16 years to a job that nobody watched and nobody thanked her for in any particular way, and that required her to give the same things, day after day, with the same patience and the same investment, to children who would grow up and move away, and mostly not think about her again, who had done it anyway, because the work week was real and the children were real. And that was enough. Owen Baird stood in front of the whole town today, he said, and told the truth. Because he knew what it was worth, he held her gaze. She was quiet. "That took," he said again, not elaborating, not explaining, just saying it twice, because some things need to be said twice. She pressed her lips together, once. The thing people do when something has moved them and they are managing it, not hiding it, just managing it. Making room for it without letting it run. "All right," she said. "All right." She picked up her papers again. He got up and added more wood to the fire. Not because it needed it urgently, but because it was something to do with his hands, and because the act of tending a fire is one of the older human satisfactions, and he had always found comfort in it. He stood at the window for a moment, the corral fence repaired, the barn with its lamp lit, the land beyond it, his land, Reed's land, the land with the creek that ran year-round, and the grass that came back every summer, and the particular quality of being a place worth staying for, 412 acres, and a school 3 blocks away where a woman had been showing up every day for 16 years, and a horse that had learned, against every reason it had to resist, to trust, and a 9-year-old who had stood in the cold and said what he'd seen. Because the adults in his life had been teaching him, through their own daily example, what honesty cost and why it was worth the price. He turned back to the room, to the woman at the table, to the fire between them. That evening the fire burned low, and the wind outside was done, and Mag graded papers at the table, while Colt sat across from her and said nothing in particular. Which was, he was learning, one of the better things two people could do together. To be in the same room, to be quiet, in the same quiet. To not need the space between them, to be filled with proof that they were there. In the morning, they went to the corral, 5 o'clock. Same as always, dark and cold, and their breathtaking shapes in the air. Two separate shapes, different rhythms, that sometimes, in the cold, came close enough to briefly become one. Ghost was at the fence when they arrived. Not at the far end, where he had stood for 8 months, watching everything with the vigilance of something that had decided the world was not to be trusted. Not at the halfway point, which had been his compromise in the early mornings. I will come this far, no further, take it or leave it. At the fence. The front fence, the gate side. His head over the top rail, ears forward, eyes on the gate, with the patient attention of something that knows exactly what it's waiting for, and is entirely confident it's coming. Mag laughed. A real one. Short, surprised out of her. The kind that happens before you can decide whether to let it happen. Ghost's ears swiveled toward the sound. The whole focus of his massive head shifting toward her, laughed the way a compass shifts toward north. Colt opened the gate. Ghost moved back to give him room. Not shying, not retreating, just making space, the way you do when someone you're glad to see is coming through a door, and they went it in together. Colt and Mag, side by side. The way they'd learned to be in this particular space. This space where trust had been built, incrementally through the accumulated evidence of patience, where the horse had decided that people could be something other than a source of pain, and Ghost came to them. All the way, no hesitation. No 6 feet or 4 feet or carefully calibrated distance. No checking to see if the space was safe before committing to it. All the way. He walked the full length of the corral and pushed his nose against Mag's shoulder and stood there. Just stood, heavy and warm and present. The full weight of a living thing that has decided over everything that this is where it belongs. That these two people are the place. Colt put his hand on Ghost's neck. The horse leaned into it. The small, slow, voluntary lean of something that has learned that leaning is allowed. That weight can be given to something without being used against you. They stood there in the cold. The three of them. In the particular quiet of a morning that has not yet had to be anything other than itself. That has not yet had to weather or perform or prove anything. That is just beginning, just becoming, just here. Mag reached up and put her hand over Colt's, not romantic. Not a gesture for anyone watching. There was no one watching, just there both of them. On the horse that had taught them both, through the peculiar stubborn language of a frightened animal, what patience really costs, and what it builds when you pay it. After a while, the sun started. Not dramatic, not the kind of sunrise you see in paintings, not the sudden flood of gold. The way December suns begin in Wyoming, where everything is earned and nothing is given for free. As a suggestion first, a slight softening of the darkness at the eastern edge, a lightening, then more of it. Then the slow, considered arrival of something that has decided to show up and is not going to rush about it. It lit the corral in pieces, the top fence rail first, then the frozen ground. Then the gray coat of the horse turning at the edges, where the light caught individual hairs, turning silver. The particular silver of a December morning in Wyoming. Cold and clear and worth looking at. Ghost, who had been named for what people decide to call things they've given up on. The things that feel present but don't show themselves. The things you move through without quite being able to touch. Ghost who was, as it turned out, still here. Still real, still warm and breathing and capable of leaning toward the hands of the people who had been patient enough to earn that lean. Still worth the work of finding out what was underneath the damage. Still worth every cold morning. Colt looked at Mag. She was looking at the light on Ghost's coat. Something in her face that was open. Not the careful neutral she kept for the world. The neutrality she'd been practicing for years. Not the composure. Something underneath all of that, the thing the composure had been protecting. A face that was simply here, present, available to what was happening, like a window that has been kept shuttered for a long time and has finally been opened. Not dramatic, not announced, just the light coming in. Like a woman who has stopped holding herself at a distance from her own life. Like a woman who has decided, after 38 years of being careful, that she is allowed to simply be here, be in the morning, be in the corral, be the woman that this particular horse comes to, that this particular man looks at, that these particular children learn from every day. Be Margaret Hale, who is not a poor thing, who never was. "Good morning," Colt said. She looked at him, smiled. "Good morning," she said, and Ghost breathed between them, slow, even. The breathing of something that has come through difficulty and found its way to the other side of it. Not unchanged. Nothing comes through difficulty unchanged, but still here. Choosing to be here. Finding that here, after all, is enough. The sun came up over Harrow Falls, over the church with its Sunday bell, and the saloons and the school that needed a new roof, and the dry goods store, and the house with the blue door that would, come spring, become a different door's color. Over the corral where Ghost stood between two people who had learned from him how to trust. Over the creek that ran year-round on the land that had a debt that was no longer due in March. Over the town that ran on work, weather, and gossip, and that was, underneath all of that, like most places, capable of more. And the day began.